in this hiring and work culture workshop. Today we have here with us Johanna and Sarah from Diversify. They are a program and ecosystem partner of Kickstarters. They will tell us a bit about the work they do, and then there is plenty of space for questions afterwards, so please don't be shy to share any challenges that you might have in your company so that they can really share their knowledge and expertise. So Johanna or Sarah or both, I don't know, I will leave the floor to you. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Lisa. Hi, everyone. So just as a disclaimer, Sarah started at Diversify this week, 1st of November. So I just invited her to come along to also learn actually about like how we do things. So for her, it's kind of part of the onboarding. Still, she's worked as a freelancer for us for the past years, so she's not completely new. So Sarah, if you want to add something or I don't know if you have an input, like just feel free to just jump in and say something as well.
Okay, will do. Thanks.
Perfect. So just a little introduction to myself and Diversify, and then we can start with the content. So my name is Johanna. I'm the founder of Diversify. The company is a startup itself, so it's like a boutique consulting company, and it's 3 years old now. I've started the company on my own, and now the team has grown to 4 people, and we're looking for a 5th person at the moment. So just that you get an understanding of kind of the size of the company. I've worked in startups more or less all my life. I have worked in a big consulting company for a year, but the rest were all different startup experiences. And I've also started another company earlier in my career when I was still a student. So I think I'm pretty familiar with the challenges that you have. And at Diversify, we are so basically, as I said, we're a boutique consulting company in the area of diversity and inclusion. But I think I have to explain a little bit more what we are doing, because like one part of our work is working with startups. Usually it's I would say scale ups actually. So I mean, you can imagine that you need some money kind of to afford to get like external HR consultants on board. So basically what we do is that we build up the HR department of startups basically from scratch. So we offer HR as a service, and we do that from the perspective of diversity and inclusion. So basically we say, okay, if you build up all your HR processes and your culture and all of that, then why not doing it in an inclusive way right from the beginning? Because I think we can all agree that this is a really important topic these days and will even become more important. So that's part of what we do. We also do other things, like we consult with large corporates. We have some publicly or like foundation finance projects that are more for the like greater good of the society. But I will focus today like on that startup part. I have prepared like a little presentation, but it's like really super short because I think it's way more interesting to talk about your questions that you might have. So I think that input should not go longer than like 10-15 minutes. And then afterwards, I'm very happy to discuss your questions. So you should be able to see it. I can't see you anymore. So sorry, that was the wrong button.
I see it.
Okay, perfect, great. So today is about hiring and inclusive culture building. So what is Diversify about? I've already said that. So for us, it's really, I think the most important factor of what we do is really to help people within organizations to develop inclusive working environments. What do we mean by that? I mean, inclusiveness basically means that you're not just having a diverse workforce, but you actually make sure that you can capitalize these differences and on the different skills and experience that the people bring in, that you make sure that people feel heard and seen and valued, all of that. And this can be sometimes a bit tricky, I would say. So I would say every kind of type of organization has their own kind of challenges to actually achieve that. And I think the problem in startups usually is that you have very limited resources. Usually you have like if it's going well, then you are in a phase of like hyper growth. So you need to act super fast. And that can make it a bit challenging to actually achieve that that inclusion or inclusive work environment that you want to have. And also, I mean, what is generally happening, I mean, we're all like super overworked, budget driven. In some companies, like especially in bigger ones, it's like highly political. So it really takes like really a consistent reflection, and also you need to kind of challenge yourself over and over again to really make the right decisions that will help you in the long run. Why are we doing this? Because we believe that everyone deserves to work in a positive work environment. And I think that's also the reason why probably, I mean, I don't know about you, I'm happy to hear, but I think a lot of people also start their own businesses because they're fed up with how the work culture in corporates is, and they wanna create an environment that they like to work in. I think that's very important, especially if you work so much as you do in a startup. And what do we mean by that? So for us, if we say like the company cultures that we build are ones that allow people to make a contribution to a better world. So I think it's very important to know the impact of your business on the world, but then also like to get things done, be efficient, to learn, to take responsibility, to do what they love, to feel seen and valued, and to empower one another. And that's basically who we are. That's our DNA. That's what we do and what we want to do. So basically, if like we check very thoroughly with the companies that want to work with us, if that's really also the work environment that they want to build, because otherwise we are not the right fit for them, because kind of we have in a way our own agency. And yeah, so this is what we do. We have developed a recruiting process that counteracts unconscious biases. I'm pretty sure you have all heard about unconscious biases. So they're basically things that influence our decision making, like information that is actually irrelevant for the role, but we can't help but being influenced by it. And we've developed a process that by design helps you to exclude most of these. There is no 100% unbiased decision making if humans are involved, and basically also if machines are involved. But you can do a lot to counteract the biases. The main things that we do is it's an anonymous and randomized screening process of the applicants. But it actually starts way earlier. So basically, and that's also for me really important for you to understand. Like sometimes people have the mindset that, oh, it's really difficult to already find people that have the specific skills that we are looking for. So for example, prior startup experience or like tech people and so on. It's like very difficult to find them. Okay, if I now also have to like respect diversity and inclusion, it gets more difficult to fill these positions. But actually, it's exactly the other way around. Because what happens is if you are not receiving applications from people that belong to underrepresented groups, the reason for that is not that these people don't exist. The reason for that is that you are apparently not attractive to these people, and that probably has a lot to do how you present yourself. So it's your employer branding, it's the language that you use, it's the way how you write like text and also how you use images on your website. It's also the connections that you have with like certain communities or you don't have. And you can actually do a lot to actually attract a wider variety of people. And that's the first step where we start usually. And then when you get those diverse candidates or candidates from underrepresented groups, then you have to make sure that they actually have the same chance to be selected than anyone else. And for that, it's really important that the first impression of the candidate is unbiased, because obviously later in the process you want to meet people in person. You also want to work with people that kind of you like in a way, or that you have a good and easy communication with, because that's really important also in startups. But you want to make sure that you give everybody the same chance to show that, right? So we work with very closely with a UK-based startup that's called Applied. It's a recruiting tool, and how it works is basically like usually in a traditional recruiting process, you would look at the CV and then the motivation letter. And so we get completely rid of the motivation letter because I think it's really bullshit. It doesn't really say anything about a person. And we have questions. We define questions that are relevant for the role. So there are questions. The questions are designed in a way that from the answer, you can judge fairly whether the person has the relevant experience for that role or not. And you're only looking at the CV in a second step. So basically, if you screen the incoming applicants, you get only the answers to these questions and no additional information to that candidate. And then also the answers are not just anonymized, but also randomized. So you don't know which set of question belongs to the same person. So you really have to judge and rate every single answer. And then in the end, you get basically in the user interface of the software, you get a prioritized list with the highest scoring candidates on top. And only at that point, you check the CV. And this makes a really big difference, because you're not using the CV to make yourself an impression of that person, but you just go into the CV to check kind of the hard criteria. So for example, if you say, hey, we're recruiting for a role where we want, let's say, at least 5 years of leadership experience, then you simply go into the CV to check, is that given? And if it's given, then you invite the person. You're not even looking at all the other things that are in the CV. You can also ask the candidates to provide CVs without personal information and all of that. We not always do it because we have these anonymized and randomized questions, and also because we know that when we are involved, that basically, we're also human beings and we also have biases, absolutely. But I think you can train, if you do recruiting for a long time, you can train to not judge people. For example, there are super nicely looking CVs and CVs that look super shitty. And one thing that you just learn with the experience is that it doesn't make a difference. So you cannot judge a person based on whether it's a shitty CV or not. And when I say shitty, I'm talking about the design and how well it's written, or how well it's structured and all these kind of things. And then what we also do is that we do so basically when we are not sure if a candidate is really interesting or not, or basically with all the candidates that might be interesting, we do a phone interview. And it's also, again, on purpose, a phone interview and not a video call, because we don't want to know how's the furniture of that person looking? Is it clean? Is it do I like the haircut of that person or not? And if you do a phone interview, you can much more focus on really what the person is actually saying. And that's also something it's also a skill that you can train to really focus on what has actually been said, instead of interpreting a lot into the behavior of people. So that's roughly how it works. Happy to answer more questions on that. But I would like to go on to the inclusive culture building. I just have like 3 examples of projects that we are doing here in that area, currently doing in that area. So, for example, what often happens is that companies come to us and say, hey, we would like to hire more people from underrepresented groups. But actually what happens is that we like a lot of the people from underrepresented groups that we have hired actually left the company. Or maybe they're still in the company, but we don't really know how well they feel and how included they feel. So what we do is that we do interviews with those people, either who have left the company or who are still in the company, or both. And the good thing or the cool thing about that is because, like, as external people, we can, like, people are talking very openly to us. They would never talk that openly in the company directly, and we kind of grant them like absolute anonymity. So in larger organizations it's easier because then we basically just receive a list of people and we pick the people from that list, so the company doesn't even know who we have talked to. In smaller organizations it's obviously a little bit more difficult because if you're just 5 people, then you know, it's like, you know, pretty much who we have talked to. But we are making sure that like the examples that we use to illustrate our points are examples or stories where you cannot exactly track back. So for example, if someone receives a comment that is Islamophobic and there's only one person of that religion in the team, then it's very obvious who we are talking about. So in this case, we would not use such an example. And like we make that very clear in the beginning, and like that we achieve an openness and honesty that is really, usually it's pretty shocking, because the things that they tell us, the stories, can be really, really harsh things. Even in organizations, you know, that I would say are already much better than the average, you know. But still, it's like kind of living this inclusive culture is not something that kind of comes naturally. So it's something that you need to raise awareness. And then like after these, after the data that we've collected, we either do like a workshop with the team, or we have like a meeting with like the leadership team of the company. It really depends a little bit on the situation. And then we talk about things that they could change. But and I think that's also really, really important to understand, is that inclusion is not something, or generally culture is not something that you can treat as any other project, you know, where you have a very rational approach and you say, okay, we have identified these problems, we have these solutions, now we do this as a next step, then we evaluate again, blah, blah, blah. So what you usually do in any other project, but the culture, and especially the inclusive culture, has a lot to do with your inner values and beliefs and characteristics as a person. And the first step really is that you, and I'm saying you now because it's you that usually, like the executive leadership team, or in startups, it's the founders. I mean, the founders shape the culture of the startup so much. It's really incredible, like how much of an influence they have. And I've seen a lot of founders that are actually not aware of that fact. So it's not like, okay, now we've identified these problems and then we can change something about it. But you really need to take a step back and reflect, how have you contributed to that culture that is currently existing? So you need to understand that you are part of the problem, and you need to change as a person your values, your beliefs, in order to then actually be able to change the culture. Because I think what happens in a lot of organizations is that you have an aspiration of how the culture is supposed to be, but like your personal reality is completely different. To give you an example, For example, you have lots of startups that say, hey, we want to have a culture of self-accountability, of self-organization, and but then actually as a boss, you realize that you don't have that trust. It's difficult to really give that trust, and then you end up micromanaging people, even though you don't actually want that, even though you promise to do better as a leader. And that happens just all the time. I think no one is free from that, and it's really important to be able and to be open to reflect about these things. It's a very personal issue. We also have a collection, or we started with a collection of inclusive practices that are in place in different Swiss organizations, so that you also get kind of concrete ideas of how an inclusive practice could look like, and to get inspired. And the third project is that it's a project of Impact Hub Zurich. They're moving to a new building in a couple of years, and here we are looking also from an architectural perspective and conceptual perspective of that new building, how basically inclusion can be a standard in basically every aspect, and not a new special thing, but really kind of the normal thing to do. That was already my input, and I'm stopping the slide share so I can see your faces. And I'm happy to receive your questions now.
There was a question in the chat, I believe.
Perfect, thank you. Okay. Are these questions primarily targeting know-how or also behavior and psychological topics? Yeah, both. So we're definitely checking the know-how. I mean, that's very important, but we're also checking what's the mindset of the person. And it's actually really incredible. I'm always so amazed by some of the answers. So for example, one question that worked really well for us in that area is for sales people. I mean, they used to travel a lot. At the moment, I think we all know that it's not working the way it was in the past, but still that could come back at one point, right? So we check what is their attitude towards traveling. And then we say hey, let's be honest, traveling can be super cool, but it can actually also be super annoying. So what do you need to make it work for you if we assume maybe you're 50% of your time on the road? And then you really have people that say stuff like, oh yeah, only travel first class, and I need this and that, and I need 5-star hotel, and blah, 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 blah. And then you just see that this person has no idea that they're applying for a startup and what it means to work in a startup. And then the person can bring amazing know-how, but it's never going to work out, right? So yeah, we definitely ask for these things.
I have a question kind of related to that, actually, because obviously we've just closed out a funding round, and a bunch of our people were kind of doing it on the side and have to leave their jobs to come full time, and it's suddenly now they're going to be employed by a startup rather than being employed by a corporate, and literally bringing stuff like that to the table, like fuel payments, etc. Equity in a startup for a reason. How would you suggest we kind of deal with things like that? Or is it the reality that the person is not right as a long-term, would you suggest we try and educate them and change them, or just be if that's their mindset, then they're not right what we want long-term?
So I think what is really important, and thank you for the question, it's a really important question. I think what is really important is that you don't judge people based on where they have worked last, because there are a lot of really entrepreneurial people that work in corporates. So just the fact that someone worked in a corporation doesn't say anything about them, right? So what you have to do in the recruiting is you need to check what is their attitude, and then you have people, and you have old people that are very entrepreneurial, you have young people that are very stubborn and inflexible, so it really has nothing to do with these things. So you really have to check for every individual person. I personally would say that it's very difficult to change personality and attitude of people. So I would rather go for people that know what to expect in a startup and that can handle it. And then rather invest on the skills side a bit more, because to learn skills and content is way easier. But then also, again, like here, I think a mistake that many startups do is that you as a founder, you have learned a lot of things from scratch in a very short time, and you managed because otherwise you wouldn't be here today, right? So, but you cannot expect that from employees. So a lot of employees need way more time to develop the same skills that maybe you have, because your learning curve was just accelerated like crazy, So in certain areas, it's also really important that you hire people that have the experience and the knowledge, but they need both, basically. So you need the knowledge, but you also need the attitude. But if you have to compromise on one, I'd rather compromise on the knowledge and not on the attitude. But then again, it really depends on what is this role, Like if it's a more junior role, then it's fine. If you need to, I don't know, like it really depends. Like, for example, if you just closed kind of, I don't know, like a Series A round, and you're like growing like crazy and you need people who know what they're doing from day one, then you have to be very selective on both attitude and know-how, right? And then it's more a question of how do you get these people on board, and then you need to invest more in the recruiting, for example, to also do like active search, like outreach to people that wouldn't apply themselves, etc. So that would be like, in general, I would say it's a huge mistake to hire people that you're not 100% convinced about, because this fires back like every day afterwards, and it's such a pain in the ass. It's really something, you hire people to like solve problems for you, not to create new problems, right? So this is so crucial. I don't know if I answered your question. Maybe you want to elaborate a little bit more, or like let me know.
I think emotionally you've answered my question, or my emotional. I have the kind of the situation is we've just closed a seed funding round, and I went full time a long time ago, and this is our first funding round, so it's been a typical startup, working like hard as anything for no money. Along the way, you kind of bring friends on the journey, people you know that kind of will help you out and work for nothing, doing it on the side. And one of those individuals is now, the plan is for them to come full time, which is great. However, everything you've just said about, you hire to solve problems, if I was interviewing this person, I wouldn't hire them.
You wouldn't hire them?
If I was interviewing them right now. And I think that's because when you just said about...
That's the answer to your question.
The culture and the founders setting, and that this is a senior person. And in my head, there's a lot of challenges and friction. And I think the bit that you said that hit me the most was you hire to solve problems. And I can tell you I've wasted 3 days in the last week and a half with problems related to this person. So I've taken something away. Thank you very much.
You've just answered your question yourself. Don't hire that person.
Thanks very much.
Any other questions? You're welcome.
Have you ever, I don't want to take over because if no one else is asking, have you ever had the situation where, looking at us as an example, and apologies, but like, typical startup going a million miles an hour, that kind of creates a certain culture. But then when you want to start hiring people, that's not necessarily the culture you want to create. So, you know, I want a team environment. Like when I quickly ran off, I could give one of our new guys a hug as he walked in the office. Like, that's what I want. But I know the culture that I currently have within the business is me going 100 miles an hour. So if you ever have this with founders and how they kind of have to shift their culture a little bit to be, this is my business, to this is our business.
Yeah, I think that's a problem that every startup has. And I personally have the same problem as well. So I think what is really important is that I have seen, like I can tell you what I have seen that I think is not the right behavior of how to deal with it. And I think, so for example, so a lot of entrepreneurs have that attitude that they say basically like, I have taught everything myself. I didn't have anyone to teach me, so I expect the same from employees. Or I am like 100% or like 200% committed. I expect the same from employees. Or I go like 1,000 extra miles every week and I expect the same. And everybody who's not doing that is not committed, is not good, whatever. And that's a very toxic environment. So if you do that, you will produce probably a lot of burnouts because people try to imitate that behavior, and it's just not working for them. It is a difference whether you're a founder or not, and it should be a difference also. And so, for example, I would say it's your job to take care also a bit of your people and to tell them like, hey, we as founders are doing this, but this is not the expectation for you, like for the rest of the company. And you also have to make sure, for example, if you like, I think there's a super nice, Netflix has a super nice culture statement. You can check it out. And one sentence that they have in there is basically the only thing that kind of drives your culture is what behavior is rewarded and what behavior is punished. So if you become, let's say, best friends with the person that works the most from all employees, people will know, oh, I have to work a lot in order to get credibility and in order to to be seen in a positive light, and then they will do it, no matter how often you say that you don't want that. Doesn't matter. It's really, and if you, for example, have a salesperson that is absolutely not a team player, but they bring their numbers, and you keep them and you promote them, then people will understand very quickly that it's okay to be not a team player and to not collaborate, because as long as you bring, apparently everything is fine. So.
But isn't that always going to be the same as salespeople? Ultimately we're in business, and this is one of my major issues. The person we were talking about is also a salesperson. So everyone immediately laughs, but the reality is, how do salespeople get promoted? Well, they basically eat other people, and then they're the ones with the biggest billers and the biggest revenue streams, and then they get promoted. Then they're suddenly the head of sales with the wrong culture, and this is kind of my massive issue.
And you absolutely have to counteract that. I mean, it's very good that you see it. I think many people, it just happens and they don't even see it. So you see it, that's already the first step. But you also have to take like deliberate action to counteract that, because if you let it happen, you will end up with with the culture that you don't want. And to be honest, I think there are also salesperson out there who are not like that. And for example, especially when we recruit for sales, we pay so close attention to the fact, like, are there just kind of like elbow mentality people who just kind of want to achieve their numbers and all of that. So for example, what you can do, like a very simple thing that you can do to to kind of self-select, a bit, is that, for example, your like the way you pay salespeople, the split of the fixed salary and the variable salary, the variable part should be, like, let's say if you do it lower than market average, then these sharks will not apply for your company because they want the highest variable part. So you can still have that variable part because I think it can make sense to have it as an incentive, but make it smaller than the market average, and then you kind of the people they already self-select themselves out, in a way. In sales you will always have I would say strong egos and fighters and all of that. That's also characteristics that you need in sales. But I think, for example, what you could also do is you could say, hey, there is a team goal that you need to achieve. And only if the team together achieves that goal, they get a team bonus, for example. In addition to the small individual. So, for example, that you also set an incentive that they really work together. You have to make sure that the team bonus is bigger, obviously much bigger than the individual, otherwise it doesn't really make sense. But this is things that you can do. And then you can still, I think that you can challenge salespeople a lot. You can also tell them hey, we want you to work together. And for example, I think it's also really important which metrics, for example, you track. So for example, we have discussions sometimes in for one company that we currently work. We also have some issues in the sales team at the moment, so it's a very, very current, it's very up on my mind at the moment. So in that organization, it's actually the case that they're not really tracking too many KPIs, But just saying okay, we have a rule, let's say that we want to answer any incoming lead in roughly that amount of time, leads to a situation where you ask someone to take over a lead from another person, and that person says, oh no, that lead is already open for 8 days. I'm definitely not going to take it over because it will ruin my average response rate, And then, you just have to talk to these people and say, come on, are you kidding me? That's hopefully a joke. Of course you take over this lead, and I don't want to have any such discussions, you work fucking together, and if that works, you can have a bonus in the end. But as long as I, as a leader, have to deal with this kindergarten shit, you're definitely not going to be promoted, and, and you need to be very clear about these things. And I think also ultimately, let go a good salesperson is very difficult. Yeah, I understand, because they're difficult to find also. But I think you have to really ask yourself the question how much are they bringing and how much are they damaging? And can you defend that balance in the end? There's no right or wrong, black and white. But I think if you have someone, for example, that is doing this kind of shit behavior, all the time, then I would personally say, hey, this is not what I want, and I'm very sure that I can find a different salesperson that is able to work as a team player, And then you have to let go of that person and search someone else. I think you really have to make these hard decisions. Otherwise it's all just talk, blah, blah. But in the end, you live something else, and what counts is what you live on a daily basis and the decisions that you make on a daily basis. And I know that these decisions are hard, so you have to weigh the pros and cons of it. But you have to make some hard decisions if you want to build a good business. Also, for example, not hiring friends that are not qualified. It's also a hard decision, but you have to make that decision if you want to build a good business.
Yeah, I think that's the massive challenge when you first start, isn't it? When you have no money, you hire who you know, and
exactly.
Then you. Yeah.
It's interesting because I think I know that you do that, and it's also fine. It's nothing wrong with that, but I think you have to. Also, something, for example, that I find really interesting is that usually, as you cannot pay that much money in the beginning, you tend to hire less experienced people, which is also okay. but then at a certain point, you actually realize that you need to become more professional step by step, right? I mean, that's your ultimate goal always. And what is very tough is that usually the people that you hire first, they usually have this expectation that they will become the lead because they are the longest with the company. But actually, what you should do in most of the cases, and you always have to look at the individual situation, so don't take anything like just for granted just because I say it. But what you actually have to do is, like, as soon as you're able to hire a lead person, and as soon as you're able to increase salaries, you actually need to attract people that are more experienced. And that's like really tough for the people that you hired in the beginning and that are not becoming the lead then, you know? But you have to have these conversations. You need to sit down with them and explain the situation and why you are doing this, and also kind of try to explain them what's in it for them, because they can actually learn from a way more experienced person that can also be a benefit, right? We actually had a situation, a very similar situation in a company just right now, where someone said, like, I actually would want to have that lead position, and we said, to be honest, we think you are a little, like, still too inexperienced for it. And then it was really interesting, because what we agreed was together that so we did an interview with that person who wanted to have the role, basically to set kind of what is it called, like a benchmark, you know? And then we agreed together, we promise you that we will only hire someone external if that person is a lot more experienced than you, because that way you can learn from that person, and it will actually be cool for you. And this is how we did it. And now that person is also involved in the recruiting process and everything, you know? And I think, like, as you have to do these tough decisions, it's even more important, how do you communicate? Like, can you still give that person the feeling that he or she is valued? And that you see the contributions and the effort and all of the things that they have given. So yeah. Suki, your question, what if a salesperson brings in a lot of revenue but is a negative person? I think that's pretty much the situation that we discussed before.
Yeah, Johanna, I've actually got another question on the back of that.
Let's hear it.
By the way, I'm loving your talk. Thank you so much. And Dan, great questions. I've worked with a number of startups over the years, and I absolutely love each and every one of them. What I have noticed is there's this kind of, sometimes there's almost like an addiction or an acceptance of we exist in chaos. And how would you suggest, like, you know, when you have enough foresight to see that the chaos doesn't have to exist, but it's more like an acceptance and an addiction of it almost. How would you suggest that you advise or encourage or reshape culture to try and reduce that chaos?
Yeah, very good question. I think the chaos usually comes from like the characteristics of some of the founders. As you said, like, what I've noticed is that usually the people that are like very visionary, you know, that can sell big ideas and so on, they're like very chaotic and unorganized. And I think what you need to understand is what everybody needs to understand in the founder team itself, that type of personality is needed, but you also need the other personality type that is very structured, you know, that is very like, is that even realistic what you're talking about? You know, like, you need all these different perspectives to, in the end, build a good product and a good company. So the first thing is that in the founder team, there is an awareness and an acknowledgement that all the different skills are needed in order to get where you want to go. I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, I would say yes. I mean, I think it's inevitable that there is chaos in startups. I think you will probably never be in the position where you have everything worked out and like everything is totally clear and you have a process for everything, because like in a way then you're also no startup anymore, right? But I think there should always be an attempt to reduce the chaos, because I think it can really hurt the organization also. And now I think,
Johanna, there's chaos in across the board, isn't there? In every organisation, it's about wanting to fight those fires and bring a bit of calm into the storm. So I fully agree. It's not just startups, it is across the board. But there's more of an acceptance in startups. I hear more and more, oh, we're a startup, it's chaotic, it's the way it is.
Yeah, it's not an excuse for bad management. Yeah, no, it's not an excuse for bad management. And I think I can just tell you like how we handle it. So what we do is, so first I think there need to be different phases. So I totally agree, or like I totally believe that there are phases where you have a big opportunity and then you just go for it and you run and you make it work and you like firefight and so on. And that's okay if it's a phase. If there's also another phase coming where people can like breathe and calm down and consolidate a few things, and then you can do the next crazy thing. But I think it needs to be in waves. I think if you only do crazier, even crazier, then you just burn people. And I think it's not something that people can do over a longer period of time. And longer period of time, I'm talking like 3, 4, 5 years. So I think that's really important. And then I think, I think it's really important to accept the chaos, but I think it's also really important to have kind of an alignment around how many resources can we invest, and do we want to invest in bringing more structure into the organization. And then if you have an alignment around that, you need to create an alignment around, okay, what are the areas where we really want to bring more structure, and what are the areas where we actually find that it's chaotic. And I think it's not necessarily chaos as such that is difficult. It's this feeling that it's never getting better. So I think it's really important to have a process in place, like a continuous process in place where you tackle one thing after the other, so that people in the organization understand, like, this is kind of the budget and resources that we have for it. We prioritize the things that we want to do, and then we also do these things, And I think if you have that, then people can also handle the chaos that happens around. But if it's only chaos and people say, oh yeah, this is just like it is, and we don't even try to do it better, I personally think that it's very wrong, but I also know startup founders who are like this, and then there's not that much that you can do about it, right? Like, if that's their belief and if that's how they want to run their company, then you can just assess whether you want to work in such a company or not. I personally have made the decision for myself that I don't want to work in such a company. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
So if there's still time, I'd also like to put a question forward. Something made me curious about your presentation earlier, and I was thinking, okay, for example, you're a founder or like a hiring manager in quite a new company, and you want to build the company culture through the hiring, but there's a difference between what you want and what you need in the company. And how could you like circumvent that bias somehow for yourself? Is there a way to do it through the process or from the very get-go and deciding exactly from the beginning what you're looking for? Or
yeah, can you maybe elaborate a little bit on more what could be the difference between what you need and what you want?
So for example, as a either founder or hiring manager, you say, I want people that are like this and that, but maybe what you need is a force to balance actually what's currently in the company or something like this. So how can a person circumvent that? Is there a set, I don't know, like an anchor to grab onto for that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's difficult in a way, because if you believe that this is what you need, but actually you need something else, you need a lot of like reflection to kind of rethink and so on. What we do, and I think that's also the role of HR, for example, or a hiring manager, is to challenge the people in the business what they need and what they don't need. So, for example, if you realize that they're always right, like sometimes what I see frequently is that no matter what the role is, they always write like the same lists of requirements, and then I'm like, what the fuck? It cannot be that it's always the same list of requirements if it's different roles, And then you have something that you can challenge, right? For example, what's frequently happening is that you start a recruiting process and then people fall in love with a candidate for whatever reason, and then they try to change the requirements to make it fit for that person, and then you have to be like super strict and say, hey, come on, like this is not how it works. And then you need to kind of try to help them to find out what they love so much about that candidate. And then maybe it turns out that they just find that person super nice, or they may be super impressed by a lot of biases that I see in startups is that, every startup has kind of like a bigger sister or brother that they're looking up to, like kind of a startup that is a step ahead, maybe in a different industry or I don't know what. And then, for example, whenever someone from such one of these companies apply at your company, you just want to hire them right away, and you're not even checking, whether they're really good people or not. And I think you can just kind of challenge. As a hiring manager, I think it's way easier to challenge people. And I think that's a role that the hiring manager should play. So hiring manager is not just here to say, yes, I will set up the phone interview or the interview or whatever. It's really that. And for example, what we do is that before we write a job description, we have a recruiting brief, and this recruiting brief is always the same set of questions. It's like, what are the main tasks of that person? What are the responsibilities? What are the soft skills? What are the hard skills? Blah, 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 such a list of that. But then also questions like, what is the most difficult aspect of that role? Or, something like that. And this needs to be filled out individually by different people. And then basically our job is to kind of combine all these different inputs and to write a job description out of it. And for example, if these things are controversial, then we sit together and have a discussion about it, So I think also a lot in recruiting, also, by the way, in the decision making about candidates, or like how you rate an interview, it's super important that first everyone sits down individually, write down their feedback and so on, and only then you come together and compare and have a discussion about it. Because if you don't do that, then usually the more senior person goes out of the interview and is like, wow, I'm really impressed about that person, and then a more junior person will never ever say, actually I'm not that impressed, Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of in the design and or for example also that you're not passing information on from between the first and second interview round, because otherwise the people in the second round are already biased by what the people in the first round thought, right? So there's a lot, actually, like a lot of details that make a huge difference of how biased or unbiased you are in the end.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's I was thinking of a specific case here, but thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Great. So I think if we have no other questions, maybe I'll just leave a few seconds to see if there's one last question. No. Okay. I think we're good for today. Thank you so much. It's been really inspiring and just very interesting to learn about what you do and some insights into how you help various companies. So thank you so much, Johanna, for being with us today. And see you maybe next year as well. And happy Friday, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having me. It was also interesting. And I hope that I could help with some of the questions. And if you have more questions, also you can also feel free to reach out. I think you have my email address, or at least Lisa has it. So that's fine too. And then I'm happy to be here again next year or at the closing ceremony. Maybe I will even meet one of you, one or two of you. So thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.